Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. As Miss Sweet Brown says, I ain't got time for bronchitis. I really don't. I don't have bronchitis, but I got the flu like a week ago, traveling to a conference, and I just can't shake it yet, so I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I haven't done video upload in a while because the vibe just hasn't been there, but 2 days ago, I got an email from a dude, Brian. So Brian, this video is for you, shout out to Brian. And basically the idea was 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, a little shy of 2 years ago, I did a video using epistemic modal logic to compare to Rumsfeld's unknown speech. So it was the intent of the video was an attempt to correlate some of the axioms in epistemic modal logic with what Rumsfeld says. There are things that you know, there are things that you know that you don't know, there are things you don't know that you don't know. So I did the video about 2 years ago, and I've been having discussion with people back and forth on the content of the video. Two things before I actually begin. One, I'm not a logician by profession. I do it as a hobby. So whatever logic I do on my YouTube channel, take it with a grain of salt. I'm notorious for not putting my parentheses in the right places and brackets and stuff. You know, I'll let you figure out where I've misplaced those things, but I appreciate the close watch. You know, the second thing to recognize is that with respect to what I'm about to discuss today, it's conceptual, right? It's an analysis of the logic itself. It's almost meta-logic, right? It's not so much the formulation of the logic that's at stake here. It's not. This is Brian's point, right? To me, it's sort of the logic behind the logic, right? Is the logic behind the logic sound? And I haven't made a video response in 2 years. I've never done a video response to the initial video on Rumsfeld and some of the axioms in epistemic modal. Today what I want to do is I want to vocalize really what Brian said with me. You know, the funny thing is I was going to shoot this video yesterday, the day after I got, but I was like, man, there's a lot of stuff here that I want to work out for myself. I want to keep some of these ideas for myself. So, but I've thought through this quite a bit to figure out how I'm going to approach it, because to be honest with you, this is very, very complicated to try and communicate this in a way that makes sense. It's definitely not going to be easy, but I've worked through mentally this lecture several times, so hopefully this will make sense. If you can follow along with the last video, with the original video from 2010 on Rumsfeld's speech and epistemic modal, then this should make sense. If you can't follow along with this video, then I mean this video is not really going to do you any good. I'm not going to go through the symbolization of all the aspects because that wasn't Brian's concern. And really all I'm doing is just vocalizing what he said. I'm not really adding anything necessarily novel to this. There might be aspects that are uniquely mine, but you know, I just wanted to give credit to Brian's email to me 2 days ago, and you know, put this information out there for the world to consume on their own, right? For those of you who are interested in doing independent research, this is what it's about, right? You're not getting a grade for this, you're not going to be evaluated on this, it's just thinking for the sake of thinking. So the idea is rather simple, right? You have things that you, oops, this is dead. You have things that you know that you know. You have things that you know that you don't know. U stands for the unknown. And then Rumsfeld says you have things that you don't even know that you don't know, right? So you have things that you know, you have things that you know that you don't know, and you have things that you don't even know you don't know. As I said before, the examples and the symbolization of these, watch the previous video so that you have to understand. I'm really only going to symbolize the last bit because this is what Brian's challenging, right? Brian wants to challenge this point, the unknown. So we're going to begin there. Again, my analysis today is going to be a conceptual analysis of this particular epistemic modal axiom via Brian's critique, because he wants to say that the contemplation of the unknown as one of the foundations of epistemic modal is problematic. That's a pretty heavy critique, right? That's a pretty heavy critique to say that this is problematic. And his argument is that we can't really talk about the fact that we know that we don't know that we don't know, the unknown unknown, right? And in the symbolization, you'll be able to clearly, I'll point out clearly where his critique lies. So the question is, how is this particular aspect symbolized? Because this is what he's critiquing. It's symbolized, and you can watch the last video, but it's symbolized as such, right? If, because it's a conditional, Rumsfeld, I use R for Rumsfeld, does not know that he, Rumsfeld, does not know some state of affairs delta, right? So this is going to be our antecedent, right? So our antecedent in a conditional if-then, this is if. So this is conditional. If this is the case, then what's the case, right? So if it's the case that Rumsfeld doesn't know some state of affairs delta, which is the unknown unknown, right? This is the unknown unknown. Then what are we saying? He has to be aware, right? There's an awareness that he has of this lack of understanding. I know that I don't even know that I don't even know, right? There's something out there that's so perplexing, I don't even have epistemological access to this. Brian is, to my understanding, and Brian, if you watch this video, comment to make sure that I did your analysis justice, but I thought it warranted me doing a video. I don't do video responses often. But I felt like your email warranted a video, a full-blown sort of in-depth analysis, and I wanted to share it with the world rather than just keep it between you and I, because I thought it was very insightful. So this is our antecedent. The consequence then says, well, there's something that he knows, right? So Rumsfeld has a bit of knowledge, right? What's the knowledge that he has? The knowledge that he has is of the complete lack, and this is where Brian has a problem, right? So the next part of it is to say that, well, Rumsfeld knows that he doesn't know the negated state of affairs, right? So this is our fully formalized formula, and this would be then, which would be our consequence, right? So our antecedent, our consequence, if this happens, then this happens. So if Rumsfeld doesn't know that he doesn't know some state of affairs delta as our antecedent, then Rumsfeld knows that he does not know the negated state of affairs, right? That's the fully realized sort of formulation of the unknown unknown. It's precisely that formulation, which is a foundational sort of axiomatic substrate, if you will, of epistemic modal. So the critique isn't really about what Rumsfeld said or the implications of what Rumsfeld says. The critique is the critique of sort of this mode of thinking. In order for us to make an analysis of this, we have to identify specifically what inconsistencies or perceived inconsistencies rest in this assumption. I thought I had another color. Yeah, I had red. So for me, if I understand correctly, the critique that Brian has, though he didn't spell it out in this sense, but I thought, again, I've been thinking about this for 2 days. I got the email from him like 2 days ago, from today, whatever date this video goes up, and I realized, oh wow, I want to address that, but I wanted to find in the logic itself specifically where he had a problem, and then I wanted to be able to, as I always do, visualize the structure of his critique so that you can make sense of it. Personally speaking, I think he has a problem with these two aspects right here. And what that means is, Rumsfeld has knowledge, right? There's a claim that there is knowledge, right? That's what that means, right? This means that knowledge has been attained, knowledge has been acquired. But that knowledge that's been acquired is a knowledge of the lack of a state of affairs. In a real sort of ghetto philosophy sense, I've done this with my feminist critique. The question is, can you know of something if you describe something in terms of what it's not? If I'm trying to describe to you what a woman is, can I and have I successfully describing a state of affairs, delta, by telling you that delta is not a shoe? A woman's not a shoe, a woman's not a toy, a woman's not a zebra, a woman's not a building. Are you any closer to understanding what something is by the articulation of its existence in terms of its negated existence, what it's not, right? This is the problem, as I understand it from Brian, right? the assumption in our consequence that there is knowledge attained of something by its negated existence. How can you make sense of, his argument is, how can you make sense of the existence of something by the fact that you don't know that you don't know? Knowledge assumes that you do know, right? Now, again, this is, at this point, still rather heady, I think. What I want to do is to make it even more accessible because, again, this is, I recognize the complexity of the formulation. So I'm going to break it down even more. So we're going back and forth on the email, and I'm trying to make sense initially of what he's saying, and he refers to the Saussurean linguistic community. So for those of you who've watched my video series on semiotics, you'll understand the framework of the linguistic community, right? So here, what we have is, we have a linguistic community. We have a linguistic community, and the knowledge that's attained thereof we'll classify as delta. The reason why I thought it was ridiculously insightful for Brian to associate the linguistic community with knowledge is that you immediately recognize that anytime we share linguistically terms, ideas, concepts, language, people participate in those terms, language, in order to acquire knowledge, right? One of the main critiques of Cartesian cogito ergo sum is that you can't find yourself in the cogito by evoking a language. Language is social, right? So Descartes undermines the cogito by evoking his language. His language is a product, his thought as language is a product of a social community, right? In a Wittgensteinian sense, it's private language, but insofar as my language is private, it makes accessibility to the content of my thoughts impossible. So it's important to recognize how this works, right? If I can get a marker that works. It's extremely important to recognize how this works. We have here an accessibility to the linguistic community by two agents, right? So, and we'll say that this agent also has his or her own private language, right? We recognize my private language. You can imagine, when I was a kid, me and my brother used to make up a fake language, and we'd talk this fake language with each other and annoy my mother to death. But the truth is, my mother could never make sense of what we were saying because we couldn't make sense of what we were saying. We were just, making a sequence of utterances and grunts and laughing at just stupidity. But there wasn't a means of accessing the content of the language because the language had no semantic structure, right? There was no relation of meaning between the utterances and the things in the world. We just made it up for the sake of it sounding good. That's a private language. It's private, it's uniquely private because I haven't infused it with any meaning. That's what's important, right? The distinction between private language and the linguistic community is one of meaning, right? Private language, by definition, is devoid of meaning, right? I'm the only individual that has access to the contents of the language. There really is no structure. Because the second there is structure, the second there is meaning, the second there is relation, it invites others to be able to access and make sense of the language. This is why Tolkien can create his own language, right? Yes, he created it himself. Yes, he thought of it himself. But there is a linguistic structure, and that structure relates to the real world. So you can make sense of Tolkien's language, right? So we recognize then that you have an individual, and that individual can have his or her own private language. That individual can also participate within the linguistic community, right, and share in ideas. And there's a whole discourse that I've already done on that. There is, however, just conceptually speaking, let's isolate a person, and this person's only relation is with private language. Meaning that the person is not connected to any sense this particular community. this community has, and linguistic community can be understood in a global sense, it can be understood in a local sense, it can be understood in so many different ways, right? The thrust, so if this should be clear, the thrust of Brian's critique, which I think was extremely profound, was this assumption, right, within our consequence, to say that Rumsfeld has attained knowledge, this first part. If this is the case, right, this is the assumption, right, if it's this case, then this has to be the case, right? If it's the case that you don't know some state of affairs delta, so here's the state of affairs delta, and I don't even know that thing, well, that has to forcefully put me outside of the realm of access to this linguistic community. I have to be this person. But if I don't know that I don't know, then obviously I'm not this person, because this person does know. I'm not this person because this person does know. I do have epistemic access to the community of ideas that lets me make sense of the content. Right? Obviously, then, I'm making the assumption of knowledge. The question that Brian brought to me, which I thought was very insightful, was under what grounds can we make sense of knowledge without recognizing that knowledge requires a linguistic community? You can't talk about knowledge as being wholly private. Private language, on what grounds is his argument? On what grounds is private language? And this is a really good question, right? On what grounds? On what grounds does private language count as knowledge? And he's saying it doesn't, and I think he makes a good point. So the first thing to recognize then, according to my conversations with Brian, is that in order for us to talk about satisfying knowledge, and we'll say that this is A has knowledge of delta, so A has knowledge of delta, and we'll call this person B. B has knowledge, B has knowledge of delta, right? And then we'll call this C, right? So we have A has knowledge of some state of affairs delta, B has knowledge of some state of affairs delta, and then here we have C. Obviously, C does not have knowledge of the state of affairs. The individual is outside of the state of affairs, right? So we can see how this relates, right? But this is the conceptually difficult bit that I thought was very, very interesting that Brian brought to the forefront, right? Now we're going to get much deeper in the analysis, right? The analysis now, but it's not going to be difficult, right? Think of it in really practical terms. Let's slow it down a bit. On what grounds could I possibly talk about my having, my possessing, my possession of, my acquisition of knowledge, if I say that my acquisition of knowledge is that I have acquired something that I don't even know that I know? Right? The unknown unknown. And the example that Rumsfeld gives is in terms of terrorism. Right? So he says, the terrorists have a weapon of mass destruction, the technology of which we don't even know exists, and we don't even know how they're going to use it. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, there's something out there, a doomsday weapon, that we don't even understand the technology or know of the technology, and that technology is going to be directed at us at a particular point in time, and we don't even know that. Right? We know that it's possible then, right? So the first thing to recognize then is that the unknown unknown is possible. No one's saying it's impossible, right? It is possible. There is a possibility to the unknown unknown. It's just that we don't know the things that we don't even know of. We don't have any access to this possibility. Rightfully so, I think, however, Brian challenges this idea, right, on a very sort of metalogical stance, right, meaning the conceptual logical analysis of the logic, right? What we want to do is we want to see how we talk about this denial of access, right? So in a sense, if we look at the negated state of affairs, right? The negated state of affairs, me being outside, right? Me being outside of the state of affairs. The question is, what does that look like, right? What does this negated state of affairs look like, right? And because in a sense, here is the state of affairs delta, and then there is a state of affairs where, right? There is a state of affairs where I'm outside of that state of affairs. I'm not within that state of affairs. I don't have epistemological access, right? The idea, this is very difficult to sort of conceptualize, but I hope I'm going slow enough to bring you into the discussion. So let me give you an example of what this means. Imagine, and I'm going to situate it in terms of sort of security, only because the initial discourse was situated as such with respect to Rumsfeld. And I'm not going to go too deep because implications and stuff, but just keep it a little surface level. And I've thought about this for a day, how I'm going to formalize this. Imagine, if you will, that myself and another person have a plan to do something diabolical. We want to unleash some malice into the world, right? And it seems like recently everybody's been trying to destroy the world. So we want to plot to release some evil into the world, some harm into the world. Obviously, I don't want other people to know this. I don't want other people who could prevent me from doing what I want to do to know the state of affairs that allows me to get this thing done. So what I need to do is I need to sort of forcefully exclude others, right? I need to exclude others. So I build up a network, if you will, of individuals who know. I build up a network of individuals who know the state of affairs, right? I create a community of people who know the state of affairs. This is what's important. The second point, then, is we recognize that the unknown is possible. This is what Brian is saying, and he's absolutely right. The second thing to recognize, though, is that the unknown is known for some. That's important, right? This is absolutely critical. This is absolutely critical, right? When we talk about the unknown, as far as an epistemic sort of foundational substrate for epistemic modal, I think it's good to have the discussion, right? And for me, as an academic, there's no greater satisfaction than knowing that you're putting stuff out into the world to get people to think. Whether or not this challenges really the core of the logic is irrelevant, as much as it is, wow, we're having a pretty cool discourse. People are thinking at this level. And this is not a simple level to think, right? The idea is a recognition, though, that, wait a second, on the second level, and this is a lot deeper, that the unknown isn't just unknown as such. It's unknown to us. Someone has epistemological access to that knowledge. Even if you assume Rumsfeld's point. Rumsfeld says the unknown is understood in terms of a terrorist organization's doomsday weapon that they're going to, use to attack the United States of America, and we don't even know that there's nothing, we don't have, and what I say in the initial videos, it becomes ineffable. You can't even articulate it because we don't even know how to begin thinking about this project. That incapability doesn't eliminate the fact that they know, obviously they know, right? The structure of this community is so safeguarded, it's so quiet, it's so secretive, if you will, it's so clandestine, it's so under the radar, that only people within that community have epistemic access to the linguistic community, to the content of information that allows that knowledge to be masked as unknown. So in a sense, if you want to visualize this, to the outside world, this content looks like this. So for a perceiver looking for this information, it looks like unknown. Think about this as being a barricade, a block. But to people inside the community, it looks like this. I have total understanding of what's going on, because I've constructed this community to specifically exclude others from the state of affairs, right? The state of affairs is the relationship, the semantic, linguistic, conceptual, relational state of affairs that makes sense of the plot, or makes sense of the language, or the community, what have you, right? This also doesn't have to be conceptualized in terms of just that, right? I mean, this is sort of the big grand narrative. In a much simpler sense, before we get to the next level, in a much simpler sense, what you recognize is, insofar as the community exists, we recognize that to evoke community means that there has to be a relationship between those who participate in the community. And the question is, what is that relationship? That relationship is the state of affairs that allows that community to exist, right? So if the nature of the community is one of destruction, then it's that. If it's one of exclusion, then it's that. If it's one of peace, it's that. What have you, right? The idea is specifically for this state of affairs, the unknown unknown. First thing to recognize, I don't know why I'm holding three markers at the same time. The first thing to recognize is that the unknown unknown is something that's possible. It's not an impossibility, just to clear it up. The second thing to recognize is that the unknown unknown is actually, and if you think about this, it's a lot deeper, but it makes sense, right? The unknown unknown is actually known for some. Okay, that should make sense. But then we get to an even deeper level, right? And I'm not going to get too deep because this is a public video. I just want to put it out there to get you thinking, because I really appreciated Brian's effort, and he got me thinking, so I'm going to throw something back out into cyberspace. And then I'm going to fall off the YouTube radar for a couple more months. But the idea then is, well, if it's unknown for me, because I do not have epistemological access, I have to recognize, however, that the fact that if I had an arrow going here, bidirectional, then I would say that I do know the state of affairs delta. Then I'd put a delta right here, but I don't have that. Conceptually, then, you'd have to think about this, right? Because I don't know about the existence of this state of affairs delta, does my lack of knowledge deny its metaphysical existence? Does it deny its ontic existence? Does it deny the fact that it exists? I mean, that's pretty pride-filled to think, well, because I don't know it, it doesn't exist in the real world. That's ridiculous. You know how many things exist in the real world that I don't know about? Right? So the next point is the unknown unknown. The existence of this thing conceptually, right? This is a much deeper level. There's actually a level after this. This is a much deeper level. The unknown unknown, as formalized fully in this sense, right? The denial of its existence can't be contingent on my knowledge of it, right? My knowledge can't be the source for the existence of this state of affairs. That's the easiest way to say it, right? My knowledge can't be the source for the existence. It can't be the cause of this state of affairs, right? So, for the unknown unknown, it exists independent to my, right? It exists independent to my knowledge of delta, of the state of affairs delta, right? Again, we're doing sort of I'm trying to do, and this is not easy, trust me, just to figure out how I was going to situate this lecture so that it could be accessible is difficult, and I am trying to make sure I hold on to the next point, which is even deeper. The idea is the state of affairs delta, exists independent to my knowledge of it, because otherwise I would be forced to make the ridiculous claim that my knowledge creates the state of affairs. No. Specifically, it exists outside because people don't want me to know, so they mask the structure that formulates the community, right? They mask this. They know, Agent A knows some state of affairs delta, Agent B knows some state of affairs delta, I don't know some state of affairs delta. I recognize, however, that the fact that I don't know means that this exists independent to my knowledge of it. So the next point then, which is really deep, is, and this is going to be important, the next point though, which is what I think was the thrust of Brian, and when I was communicating back and forth with him, he acknowledged that this was a good point. The point is, however, that since we recognize that there isn't a contradiction, right? It's not that we're saying this, right? It's not that we're saying that there's both a state of affairs, we'll just say A and not A, right? We're not making this claim, right? It's not a contradiction. It's not both 6 feet tall and not 6 feet tall. We're not saying that. This is not this. What we are saying, though, however, is that we don't have access. It exists. Its existence is independent to my knowledge of it. My knowledge, the fact that I don't know, doesn't deny its existence. The fact that I don't know doesn't create a condition of contradiction. That's important. The fact that I don't know does not create a state of contradiction. That's false. It doesn't do that. All that happens is the fact that I don't know, it lets me know that I need to gain access, right? I need to find a way to gain access. I need to find a way to gain access to the structure of the linguistic community, right? So conceptually then, what you want to do is you want to transform the perceived unknown into, you want to transform the perception of not knowing into really knowing. The question is, how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, number 4 is you locate the structure, right? You come to understand the structure of the community, right? And it's not, you only do this through sort of deconstructing. It's very difficult to figure how to do this, and I'm not going to lecture on how to do this now as much as, because that would be another point. The point here is to challenge the idea of the unknown. So at number 4, right, because we recognize that it exists independent to my knowledge, and we recognize that this independent existence is not a contrary existence, right? We recognize that it exists independent to my knowledge, but we also recognize that its existence is not contradictory, meaning I can gain access to the structure of the state of affairs delta, which is here. Well, how do I go about doing it? I go about trying to unfold, unpack, deconstruct, gain access to the structure, the state of affairs delta, right? So there must be unknown allows for, it allows for access, right? And number 4, the unknown allows for access into what? It allows for access into delta, right? The unknown allows for access, specifically epistemological access, into delta. The fact that I don't have epistemological access, it would be false to then deny metaphysical existence. 1. The fact that I don't have epistemological access, it would be false to necessitate contradiction. 2. The fact that I don't have epistemological access, it would be fallacious to say that no one has epistemological access. 3. Thus, I recognize that insofar as I don't have epistemological access, I need to try my best to find a means of reconstructing the nature of this state of affairs delta. Insofar as I recognize that the state of affairs can be reconstructed, delta can be reconstructed, then this becomes mere perception. The unknown doesn't exist as such because it has to be known for some, right? You can't talk, and this is Brian's point, you can't talk about it being knowledge if no one else can gain access to it. Someone can gain access. The question is, how do I go about reconstructing the pattern, the relationships, in order to fully gain access to the state of affairs delta, right? So there is, in a sense, a malleability a flexibility in the unknown unknown. Brian might go further and just deny it outright. I'd take the more sort of cautious view to say, well, there isn't a fixed state of affairs, delta, that's unknown unknown as such, right? There is a state of affairs, delta, that can be unknown unknown to some, but to say that there is knowledge, means that at least one other member has access, right? Because that access requires a community. It can't be this solipsistic, internalized conversation, because even that conversation introduces another person, right? It would have to be a completely fabricated fake language, which isn't really language, like I said before, and then that's not really knowledge, right? So to call it knowledge, to say that it's knowledge, requires at least one other person or language. And if you don't have that, then you haven't sufficiently met the condition for language. So yeah, pretty intense. I think that does this analysis justice. Brian, big shout out to you. Let's put Brian's name on the board. Put it over here. So there you go, Brian. Yeah, I don't really do video responses to people's prompts, but when I do them, I try to do justice to our conversation. I thought our conversation, Brian, was good enough to share it with the world. So yeah, I'm just throwing this out there. Leave your comments, tell me what you think. I'd be interested to see what the world has to say about this. So with that, I want to thank you for taking your time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and like Sweet Brown said, I really ain't got time for bronchitis. Thanks, goodbye.